Probably movie Phantom stage role. That would be my pick.
Mm-hmm. What if it was one of the other Phantoms though? Like, what if it was Colm Wilkinson?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Who's
I could live with
Colm
that.
Wilkinson?
Colm Wilkinson is my favorite Jean Valjean, but he's also, he's one of the big names for Phantom. Um,
He was a good John. He was a good Jean
yeah,
Valjean.
yeah, he's my favorite for Jean Valjean. Like if I'm gonna do Les Mis, I'm gonna listen and watch the 10th anniversary concert edition.
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay.
I refuse. I can't do the movie. I can't do it.
For good reason.
It's there's so many choices that were made in this film. One of them being Russell Crowe.
Wait, Russell Crowe's in it? I
Yeah,
thought
Yeah,
he
there's
he's
was
a lot of
good at
choices.
acting.
it.
Yeah, he's great at acting, not good at singing, but that wasn't the
What?
point of it. So, yeah.
Russell Crowe's singing?
Look, I
It
love Russell Crowe, but he was not meant to sing. I don't want
and
to get punched in the face, but he was not meant to sing.
he was not. A lot of people that were in the movie weren't really meant to sing, but
Uh,
you know,
poor,
it's it's fine. But the
poor Anne
acting,
Hathaway, they made her sit down for that entire song when she needed all the breath support. Poor Anne Hathaway in that movie.
um, well, it's funny because like even though the movie also had musical theater actors in it, but like nobody really did their best work.
No,
Like
that was
Hugh,
Christopher. That was the director's fault, though. That
it
wasn't the actor's
it
fault.
was. But I mean, like Hugh Jackman's a musical theater actor. You wouldn't know that based on that movie.
It's true. Oh, are we live? Should I be introducing us? Has that happened
We
yet?
are well past that moment. You guys are just having a
Oh, how
blast with this
exciting!
conversation. I'm having problems cutting in, and I don't want to hurt your feelings or nothing, but I'm entertained. Keep going.
That's fine. Hello, everyone. It is the top of the hour. I am here dressed as Eric, the dude that lives beneath the Phantom of the Opera in the sewers and definitely and totally doesn't have sewer smell. I am here with the enchanting Rihanna, who's going to be talking with me about musical theater. Hello, Rihanna.
Ah,
Yes. Hello. Welcome. So basically, what I have is we're going to do a little bit of a comprehensive overview of musical theater and just chat about shows that we love and why we love them. You were listening to us diatribe about Les Mis, which we're going to get to. But before we get to Les Mis, we need to set some groundwork for the sad story of people in Paris being killed by revolution. Um, I want to start in the 1960s, if that's okay with you, Rihanna.
yeah.
Yeah. So originally, this was structured as a trivia night. So I'm actually going to ask you the trivia questions and use that kind of to jump into the discussion about the show, if that's okay.
Yeah. We can definitely do it like that. That works.
Yeah. And I think I'll kind of do it the way that I do my other trivia night here at REM, which is where like I do half of the questions and then we go to the lightning round and come back. I
Hmm.
think that'll be fun. I think that'll be a good show. We'll have a good show. We'll have a good show, everyone. Places, please, as they say backstage.
I'm ready.
Okay, so from the
Can
1960s,
you
and all these
put
categories
REM
involve plays
alternatives?
that either were created in or they were revitalized. So they had like a big revival in that decade.
Mm.
Um, so the first one is about Hello Dolly, the Barbara Streisand on film, and Carol Channing and others on stage.
Yes.
Hello Dolly also prominently features in which Disney film?
Disney film? Oh man. Hmm, I don't know.
Oh, Hello Dolly was kind of the centerpiece of Wally. So the film about the
Oh yeah.
robot
And I
that falls in love. Yeah. Yes, and so Hello Dolly, interestingly enough, they take probably the longest and less known song from that musical, and they turned it into a centerpiece for a
Mm-hmm.
Disney movie. Um, and I kind of love that because it has to do with kind of mixing things, like the idea of mixing how a robot becomes more human
Mm-hmm.
with kind of that already human experience. Also, just what a weird thing to choose from musical theater pantheon is a song about falling in love in a park from the end of Act Two of Hello Dolly.
Yeah, I mean, but it's a but it makes sense for that with the whole like oh, a robot's trying to feel more human aspect because like the most complex human emotion is arguably love because you can't quantify it. You hard it's not quantify. It's hard to qualify because if you're like, "Oh, well what is love?" It can be so many things. And so, for him to like that be the part that he's attached to and like learning how to become more human, it makes
And
more
then they
sense.
get, and then they get to hold hands, which
And
is
then
nice.
the hands, which is so cute.
Yes, considering one of them doesn't actually have a hand and it's just more like a paddle, it's very adorable. That was my Hello Dolly question. Do you have any thoughts on Hello Dolly the musical? Either film or screen, because film and screen are two different things. Like a
Sure.
film adaptation of a musical, like Les Mis, is quite different on the big screen versus on stage.
Well, I think that as far as, that goes, we can just, there's like two categories, right? Like you have the stage production, but then you have the movie production, and then does the movie live up to the stage? Like, does the film do the original production justice? And I would argue, like, okay, in my opinion, the film of Hello Dolly, it does. It does a stage production justice. Like it's not the same and you can do a lot more with a film. Like you have there's more that you can do. But I think the fact that also, Hello Dolly had the people who sang actually sing, and you know, and it was people who actually knew what they were doing. I think that helps a lot. There are a lot of times where we cast movie musicals now and not everybody knows what they're doing and you can tell. Like if you come from a performance background, you know. And
Yeah,
you can still tell like, "Oh, are we using a backing singer or is this person's actual voice?"
I will say I do love the depth of field that you get for a film musical as opposed to the stage version.
Mhm.
Because for Hello Dolly, especially, there are a lot of like flats which give you like a set, but then a stage is finite. A living, breathing street is kind of an infinite thing you can
Yeah,
shoot on.
yeah, like there's more that you can arguably do with a film. But I mean, I think Barbara Streisand does a good job.
I do
I
love
like
a musical where you can sing during a parade.
yeah,
Because I feel like that's a good emotion. Just singing during a parade is like an emoji that I would enjoy having.
yeah. I mean, and it gets you moments that you wouldn't, maybe get to have otherwise. Like, you're not going to get to have the same moment of when she goes into the club or the restaurant and gets to perform with Louis Armstrong.
Yeah.
You can have more variety.
And I mean, for people that like kind of more solemn, um, less fun Christmas music, I guess, Michael Crawford, who was one of the leads of this film,
Mhm.
one of the guys that worked at the general store, did release a Christmas album. Um, which if you like kind of more high church, less energy, Christmassy stuff, the Michael Crawford album is great. But you really got to know that's what you're going for there. It's
Yeah.
it's not a dig on it. It's just like if you want Mariah Carey's Christmas album, it's not that by any means. It's definitely much more high church than it is high pop.
Hmm.
Yes. While we're talking about Barbara Streisand, how do you feel about Funny Girl as both a stage and screen show?
So I only know Funny Girl as the film. Um, I haven't seen the stage production. Uh, so I can't compare the two. And honestly, Funny Girl, I haven't watched nearly as many times as I have other musicals. It doesn't speak to me in the same way, so I can't fully give an opinion on it.
Could you answer the trivia question, do you think?
I can try.
Okay, so here's the trivia question for it. This is like a multiple point one, so you get a point for everything that you get right.
Okay.
Can you name the different vehicles that Fanny Bryce rides to get to the cruise ship that Nick is at, where he has this big poker tournament? Just kind of the turning point of the show for her.
No, I can't.
Can you name any of them?
No. I can honestly say I was not paying attention to any of the vehicles.
Okay, well, this is in the musical. This is when she sings her big kind of "I Want" song. This is the one that Leigh
Mhm.
Michelle did in Glee, and all that. And so she starts
Yeah.
on a train because she's at a train station at the beginning of the song, and then she gets in a cab when she gets to wherever the train went, which is not clear, and then she gets in a tugboat for some reason in New York Harbor, and that's that big scene of her on the tugboat. It's all one long song.
Okay.
Yeah,
I did not realize that she got on a tugboat. It's
yeah.
again, I may have only seen it like twice, honestly, and it was a long time ago.
Have you ever gotten on a tugboat for a man that you were in love with?
No, the only tugboat I'm familiar with is Theodore Tugboat, and that is a children's show from way back in the day.
Yeah, I don't think Theodore Tugboat was a tugboat you could actually like ride to
No.
meet your true love at a
No.
their oceanside poker tournament for some reason. Also, they did make a sequel to Funny Girl. Do you know what the sequel is called?
No, I
Yeah.
don't.
So the Funny Girl sequel is called Funny Lady, and it's all about like Broadway during the Depression and Fanny Bryce basically having no money and Nick having to rescue her from like a swindling like drifter guy. So
Okay.
it goes back a little bit on the mantra of self-sufficiency that Funny Girl tries a little bit to give Fanny. Just a little bit, just goes back a little bit. It's still very much a musical about being in love.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, so if Funny Girl's not your cup of tea, do you know anything about the Music Man by any chance?
I do.
Oh, okay. I love that. That's enthusiasm right there.
I
Um, so the Music Man, can you tell me what city Professor Harold Hill went to school in?
Gary, Indiana.
Yes. Or another point, can you tell me the name of the school that he went to that was not fictitious but did not exist in the year that he claimed to go there?
Gary Conservatory.
It is
Right?
it's the music conservatory, and then he keeps
It is.
adding facts. The gold medal class of
Yeah.
'05,
Yep.
yes, which is the year before Gary, Indiana, was made into a
Mhm.
city. Fun
Yeah.
fact. Do you like the Music Man?
I do. I love The Music Man. I it was one of like the three musicals I put on every day when I got home from kindergarten. It
Ooh,
it
great.
was The Music Man, it was Singing in the Rain, and it was my VHS copy of Cats, which was the recording of the original 1983 London cast.
Was that the one where they added all the lightning bolts and things like that?
Yes, it was fantastic. I watched that VHS every
Fantastic.
fucking day. I was it was like one of three musicals I watched on repeat.
The Music Band is one of those musicals that is quite a bit similar from stage to screen.
Mhm.
Um, and I think this is important for people that do creative work, especially to recognize that some musicals really adapt well and some you really have to fiddle with. Like when we talk about Chicago, Chicago is quite a bit. You have to fiddle with it quite a bit in order to make it work um, as a screen musical. But in the case of the Music Man, do you have a favorite Music Man character?
You know, I might have like a couple. I really like the mayor's wife. I love Eulalie.
Please honor her by her full name, Eulalie McKechnie Shin,
I got you.
played by the indomitable Hermione Gingold, um, one of the great character actresses of the golden age of Hollywood.
She's such a good character. Like I know she's just a side character.
I do have friends when I'm like at a library or a bookstore with them. Sometimes I'll just lean over and go, "It's a schmutty book," in kind of that way that she does when she's talking about Balzac, which I
Yeah,
appreciate as a literary reference.
yeah. She she really put her all into saying that word in that song
I
when it
mean,
was
Balzac is a great word to put
good.
into a musical, like,
She
and I feel like you should put your
put
all into it.
all of it in there. She was like Balzac.
Yes.
I love her.
Also, the fact that two people having a picnic is considered dirty in that era tickles me quite a bit. So
And then God, who would my other favorite character? I mean, like I really I love her also when, she actually starts to uh in her own way stand up to George, her husband, the mayor. Like
yeah,
when she stamps her foot, it's the indignation is really funny. Just like she's like, "No." And then he's like, "What is happening?" Um,
uh,
and then
she's a very soft Karen. She's the kind of Karen you can mollify,
yes.
which is nice.
And then, I guess my other favorite character, I I think it would have to be Marion. She just doesn't take any shit. And she figures it out really quickly. She figures out that it's all a lie.
Yeah,
She's
yeah. I like Marion as kind of an other character
mhm.
because in a musical, especially, the other character generally has the job Marion has where they're kind of outside the problem and they either solve it or they're just very they get kind of caught up in it and they kind of go away. I appreciate the work they do with Mary. I think this is my favorite one of my favorite musicals because it feels like a very masculine musical.
Mhm.
Whereas a lot of musicals feel very feminine. There's a barbershop quartet. The opening song is like a rhythmic Hamilton-esque rap, if you will, but it's not a rap, but it's definitely like a rhythmic. The
Because
people the people in the train car actually
yeah,
doing like train car breathing um, while they sing, which is kind of amazing.
yeah. But then also, well, the other thing that sets the Music Man apart as like a show is the fact that it also features a patter song, which really they're not that common. Like they're very hard to do, like technique wise. Their patter songs are really hard to do. Um
So
And
for people that don't know, what is a patter song? I'm not going to make you sing. I'm not going to make you do lyrics for a patter song or anything. But what is a patter song for people that don't know?
a so the best example that I can kind of give of a patter song would be, and this would be one that a lot of people know, they just don't know that it's a patter song because they're hard to explain. They're very rhythmic, but in more of a specific way. Like you like a patter song would be I am the very model of a modern major general. That's kind of like a patter song. It's one that it's the same technique. It's very difficult to do. You have to speak very fast. So it's not technically singing so much as just like really fast rhythmic talking,
Yeah.
which is where it differs from things like rap. It's not the same. It's very staccato, so it's very just I don't know, it's like on the beat every time.
So The Music Man, interestingly enough, is one of the few musicals that is referenced more than one in current pop culture. Specifically Family Guy. Seth MacFarlane, it has this like weird obsession with The Music Man because it's been in the show. They've done Shapoopy, they've done Pick a Little Talk a Little. Um, I don't think they've done anything else, but those two moments kind of put it more in pop culture than other
Mhm.
musicals in a lot of ways. Um, and it's an interesting thing because I feel like, in so much as Seth MacFarlane does not honor any other creative work in Family Guy, I felt like he uplifted the Music Man when he used it. Um,
Mhm.
it's very sacred to him. I think he did a London concert at some point. I think he actually might have done "You've Got Trouble," which is one of the best kind of character introduction songs I can think of, especially for a male vocal. "You
Yeah,
Got Trouble" right here in River City is pretty iconic in a
yeah,
lot of
and
ways.
it's the
Enjoyable.
so
Chat
like
has
so
two questions for you guys. Is
yeah.
the song Pick a Little, Talk a Little and Surfin' Bird also patter songs?
Pick a Little Talk a Little does fall into the category of a patter song, but it's multiple voices. I don't know the other song.
The other song, "Surfin' Bird," is not part of a stage screen musical. I will say "Surfin' Bird" as a device in Family Guy is mainly used to add color to the story. So if Family Guy was for some reason a musical, it would have a different place. It wouldn't be a pattern song. It's a song from 1960 that the lead of Family Guy gets very attached to.
Oh, is that
Um,
Bird is the Word?
yeah, the "Surfin' Bird" is the "Bird is the Word" song. Yes.
Yeah, that one wouldn't count as a patter song because it's not just like rhythmic talking.
Yeah.
Um, which
I,
is really
I
singing is itself like sustained talk.
I will say I do love the challenge. If no one has seen it, especially you don't want to watch the ABC version that they did with Kristen Chenoweth and Matthew Broderick. You want to watch the classic with Robert Preston.
Mhm.
And what's her name? I can see her in my head, but I can't remember her name. But you want the Robert Preston original Music Man because that's the one with Hermione Gingold and Mary Wicks. And their version of "Pick a Little, Talk a Little" is probably the closest to what you saw in music in Family Guy, but it's better in the movie because there's more people
Yeah,
doing more things, but it's still a huge gossip session where the audience is getting a lot of information. If you like to write tabletop games, The Music Man is actually really good because the way that information is dispensed in The Music Man to the audience that is happening in the background of the show, both before the audience arrives and before Harold Hill arrives in Iowa. Um, The Music Man is a really great way to look at how to disseminate information for the audience and the character's benefit. I think.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
well, I would also say like with the film version, you also Pick a Little Talk a Little turns into a duet also at the end of it because then the quartet comes in and they do Good Night Ladies. So it turns into like
Yeah.
interesting duet where it's not a duet between two characters, it's a duet of totally different songs between two groups of people.
And what's great is that the Buffalo Bills that were hired to play
Mhm.
the mayoral aides that were that barbershop quartet, that was
Mhm.
their professional life. So they
Yep.
were actually hired to do the thing they did
Yeah,
professionally. It wasn't just four random guys they happened to make happen into a barbershop
they
quartet.
were this was an actual barbershop quartet. They were competitive winners. Like they
Yeah.
won the international competitions several times. So, yeah.
That was all happening in the 60s, mind you. What's really interesting is that in the phase of musical theater, much like everything else, there's phases, and so in the 60s, there was both this kind of big change in how we viewed musicals, but then you also had shows like Hello Dolly. So you had a Hello Dolly where it had a very classic structure, was a big budget, and then you had a show like West Side Story, which was
Mhm.
really new. It had kind of a new composer, new feel. Lots of people balleting through inner city streets, which is something I both love and dislike about West Side Story. There's no ballet in Music Man, but it doesn't need it. West Side Story
Yeah.
does.
Well, West Side Story, you also get the fights and they're starting out with snaps. That's
Yeah.
even, you know, you get dance fights with West Side Story. There's no dance fights in The Music Man.
I mean, maybe not in your production. There's no dance fights, but
If a dance fight broke out in the middle of Shaboopy, I would be here for it.
that's what the Grecian urn is for. That the Mirror's wife does. That's the precursor um, to a dance knife fight with Shabupi. So yeah. So moving into the 70s, you get stuff that's much more spiritually experimental, like West Side Story. This is where musicals start getting like weird and fun when they make them into films. So you get things like Godspell, which is a musical that I was in. Um, do you know which book of the Bible Godspell is based on?
Oh God. I feel like
Yes,
I
that's
do.
what it's about. It's a musical about God, essentially.
Yeah. I feel like I used to know. Um, but you know what? I'm just gonna make a random guess. I
I mean,
want to.
there's four. You got a 1 out of 4 chance of getting it. So
I just is that is that the one that like is Ruth a prominent character in Godspell?
can be because all of the disciples are based on the names of people that are playing them traditionally. So you could
Mm-mm.
have a Ruth, but Ruth is not technically in the show.
Okay. You know what? I'm gonna say Genesis.
Genesis does have a song in it, but it's based on the Gospel of John. It's based on
Oh, John.
John is actually the longest gospel. Actually, um, this is one of the experimental shows, Godspell. This is when experimental off-Broadway stuff was really coming into its own. Godspell and Hair kind of all come out of this great tradition. Godspell is interesting because it's a show about clowns, basically, especially the film. But the whole show is essentially improv and done with clown work. So it has a much
Okay.
less formal, rigid feel than something like The Music Man.
Oh, so I can say like I've I've at least listened to the soundtrack of Godspell like maybe once or twice.
Yeah.
just, because why not? But I have never actually seen it. So now that I know there's a clown work, that's
It,
wild.
it's all improv and clown. Like the way the characters get made up in the movie is very similar to what happens to them on stage. Um, they start off as philosophers before they're disciples, so it really does lean into like the metaphor of religion as philosophy. And poor Victor Garber up there on that chain link fence that's like a cross hitting that high tenor A when
Oh,
he's dying, because literally that's like the highest tenor note you can hit. I don't think he could do it any anymore, but you have to be pretty young to play Jesus because
yeah,
the tenor notes Jesus has to hit in Godspell are very high.
that's a struggle.
Yes.
That's
If you're interested in learning anything about musical theater, if you can still find it on YouTube, they actually have a behind the scenes documentary of the making of Godspell, the film, where they talk about the clowning and they talk about the improv field and they talk about what it takes to basically take portions of New York and make the people not use them for days on end, which is hilarious and terrifying and something you couldn't do now.
that's wild.
Yeah. Victor Garber also has a less prominent but a definite starring role in one of the best musicals of all time. Do you know what musical I'm talking about?
God, but there's like so many to choose from.
Yes, but there's one important answer to this question involving Victor Garber.
I can't think of it, and I feel like I'm gonna beat myself up about it.
That's fine. I'm only going to judge you a little bit. Victor Garber plays the king, the father in the '97 Cinderella with Brandy and Whitney Houston.
I should have known that.
It's true. I'm only judging you a little bit, so like that's pretty good, right?
In my defense, that was like on Disney Channel, and we did not grow up with cable.
Okay.
So it wasn't until like adulthood at some point that I actually watched that Cinderella, because then I had access to it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Uh,
I'm
so Godspell is an interesting show because it does have a structure, but most of the songs in Godspell were actually not songs written for Godspell. The point of Godspell is really more the clown work than the music, which is weird to say about a musical because when you think about a musical, you think about songs being so integral to it.
mm-hmm.
Most of the songs in Godspell actually were already like Christian hymns that just got 65 essentially and updated for the times, but most of the songs in Godspell are not traditional theater songs. They were
Right.
songs already somewhere else, which is something that happens every now and then in theater.
Yeah, well, it's just like when God, which is the one that we use all the Billy Joel songs for?
Uh, I get I mean maybe there's a Billy Joel musical. I don't
There
actually know.
there is. It's not like a Billy Joel musical, but only Billy Joel songs are used.
I mean that sounds fantastic. I'm gonna venture a guess and say it's probably called Piano Man. 'Cause that's the
It's
Billy Joel song everybody knows, even
it's
though he's had like 40
you know,
hits.
it's God, I like it's in my brain, but it's not coming to me.
Well, you can think about it.
Got
So I keep talking
it.
about kind of experimental theater in the '70s, and if you think of the Billy Joel musical, you can totally break in.
It'll come to me one day.
Yes. So '70s experimental theater. is really interesting because
Hey,
in that,
John.
I
Apparently, it's
yes,
called Moving Out.
moving
Yeah.
moving out is the name. Thank you, voice of tech. Thank you, Max,
You're
for the
welcome.
yes. We know what year moving out is from. I'm going to Google it because I can do that.
I
I'm
want
on the
to say that
internet.
it's I want to say that it's like maybe the 90s or like late 80s at best.
It's also the name of a video game. So if you Google moving out, you don't get anything. So it's actually moving out, not moving. There's no G in it. There's an N and then there's an apostrophe. Um, so moving out is actually useful for this because it is what is called a jukebox musical, and we start seeing these in the 70s because it's based around one kind of storyteller or concept. So moving out, American Idiot, in a way, Godspell is a jukebox musical because it's all gospel music.
Across
Um,
the Universe would also be a jukebox musical then.
yes, Across the Universe is probably the most famous I'm gonna say juice box, but I know it's jukebox with a K, not with an IC. Um, yeah. Carol King's Beautiful Musical would be considered that. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
also probably uh, jukebox, not
And
juice box.
so is oh god. There's another one in there. It's all like 80s music. I can't think of it off the top of my head. So
I have that.
Mamma Mia.
Not
no,
Mamma Mia.
it's
Mamma Mia
one
is technically a spectacle musical. I think. I don't think it's a
um does anybody remember that dude Constantine from American Idol because he was in it?
I think you're talking about Rock of Ages, which I
Yes.
think is probably a jukebox musical.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's a musical that they. So what's interesting is that that is a musical that is about masculinity outside of the concept of the musical itself, because they often, when someone talks about Rock of Ages,
Mhm.
um, they try to butch up how they sell it as like a musical that men can love, which is crazy because men have loved musicals for years, and to have to butch up and masculinize how you sell the story, uh,
Yeah.
I find a little strange, and also just like why Rock of Ages it's an interesting thing to see kind of how people talk about Rock of Ages as a show, because they want so hard to masculinize it as not musical and turn it into a concert, but it's a musical, and
It's
that's okay.
well, you can try to dress it any way that you want. It's a musical.
It's a musical, and Tom Cruise was in the film version of that, singing a lot.
Yes.
Um, yes.
Oh.
Other experimental theater in the 70s that is not jukebox musicals. So one that people really like is an experimental based around an already occurring concept. This is something we start to see in the 70s, whereas in like the 20s to the 60s, Broadway was setting culture. And here in the 70s, we start to see them picking things out of culture. So you've got shows like You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, which every high school does because there's no set to it, so you can afford to stage it pretty well. Um, can you tell me which character in You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown is technically not a Peanuts character? Because You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown is based upon specific Peanuts moments, which
Mhm.
is a comic strip by Charles Schulz. But one of the characters only exists in the musical. They do not exist in the Peanuts comic strip.
Oh.
This was the hardest question in the 1970s category, by the way, for anyone curious where this would have been in
It
trivia night.
it is a very hard question because now I'm trying to remember all of the characters.
I know. And
And
it's
then
not the one you're going to expect either, which is what makes this so great.
I don't know.
So there's a character called Patty. And Patty is technically not a Peanuts because the Peanuts character, Peppermint Patty, is a different character. And Peppermint Patty is called that because there was already a Patty in a different comic when Charles Schulz created Peppermint Patty, which is why she's called Peppermint Patty in Peanuts.
Mm-hmm.
But for the show, Your Good Man Charlie Brown, she exists because she has to, but she's technically only a character of that stage play. She's not a character.
Interesting.
Yes. Also, that was a lot of words to say she only exists in the stage play, but people are used to that when I talk, so.
That's fine.
And what's nice about Your Good Man Charlie Brown is that kind of shows that you don't have to do the big spectacle to have a good musical. Your Good Man Charlie Brown is liked not just because of nostalgia, not just because it's something you can easily make fun of on Saturday Night Live, but it's a pretty solid story. It's a familiar story. It doesn't try to rewrite the Peanuts universe. It's not gritty like a 2000 Batman movie. Um, it's this really great showcase of what Peanuts was already doing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's an interesting Broadway show because, like Avenue Q, it only has really one set.
Yeah.
Um, and then it's more about the character work. And so, like, if you're a creative who wants to look at a musical that you can do on a shoestring budget, You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown is a good one. Um, Especially if you just have no money to stage anything, which is very possible. It's very expensive to make a musical. Um, I've never gotten to see Your Good Man, Charlie Brown, but I've heard the vinyl and I really like it.
Mhm.
So it's a fantastic show. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it has like the soundtrack is really good.
Yes.
I also have not actually gotten to see it. It's not one that's gonna get a revival anytime soon.
No, also, well, if they revive it, so here's a fun fact. If you have a particular show you love and you're wondering why you couldn't do it during high school, it's because if they were reviving it on Broadway, it's
Mm-hmm.
likely that you could not buy the rights to it to do in your high school.
Yep.
Like when a show is on Broadway or being revived on Broadway or nearby, there's actually like a thing that happens where then you can't do it in a school setting. Um, and I have no idea what it's called. There's a fancy term for it, but it's very much like if it's happening on Broadway, it can't happen in your school. Probably why we haven't seen many Jersey Boys happen in school anywhere.
Oh, that would be a really wild school production. Like, you know, because there's certain things that happen in the musical that you would have to navigate doing with high school students.
Yes. Speaking of something to navigate, my favorite composer starts to come into his own in the 70s. And that's Stephen Sondheim. Anyone that knows me knows I love two things about musical theater. I love Little Shop of Horrors, and I love Stephen Sondheim. And so one of his first works, potentially the most experimental in its first version, not the revised one that we normally get now, was called Company. Do you know anything about Company, Rihanna?
Um, you know, I've definitely listened to it.
Okay. Well, that's a start. You might actually get this. This is one of the triple point questions. So you could actually get like 3 imaginary points if you can get this question right.
We'll see if I can.
I mean, I hope you're keeping score of your points too, because these are all good for like fictitious gifts in our fictitious trivia night gift shop that we have. Um,
Okay.
so the musical company is all about Bobby and both his set of friends and the people he's dating. You get a point each if you can remember the names of the 3 unmarried women that Bobby is dating throughout the course of Company.
Oh God.
He does say that at one point during Barcelona. He does say, "Oh God," but in time with music.
They're not coming to me.
All right, so the 4 girls are April,
Oh.
whose whole character is that she's a flight attendant who is very dumb. She has my favorite monologues in the show about thinking that when she came to New York, she'd moved to somewhere called Radio City, like it was a little city inside of New York City. Love April. Marta, who's the voice of the People on the Train song, which is really great. And then there's Kathy, who is the one that leaves the show halfway through to get married, which starts out the second act, but is different in the original 70s version of the show. In the 70s version of the show, the ending of it didn't exist, and so the actual ending of it, if you can find the original cast album featuring the dude that would go on to play in the Disney movies with Herbie the Love Bug, um, it has a
Was
completely different soundtrack. Yeah,
with Dean Jones?
yeah. Dean Jones was the original Bobby from Company.
Oh, I love Dean
Yeah.
Jones.
And Sissy Spacek was in this show, I believe. She played in the original cast album. Can't remember who she played. I think she played she either played April or she played one of the wives, obviously. Um yeah, but so this show is interesting because in the original production, the set was this like really big piece of essentially moving elevator sculpture. So like if you see Company now, they generally do it on a really bare set and everyone plays their own instruments, which is a holdover from the original show. But it was basically a series of elevators that characters would get off and on of to get off and on stage. It was this big metal sculpture in a show, which is not something you see on Broadway a lot. You see it more in like European or Australian traveling tours, like with their big Wagner's Ring cycle they did in Australia a few years back, where they had to literally build a stage to hold the metal for Ring Cycle. But like Company originally was envisioned as this like big, harsh New York cityscape, and the metal was very present, and it really influenced how the characters moved in the space. Whereas now it's like the absence of space and stuff before it was all metal. It's a really cool concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also a great musical if you've never heard the score. Company is one of the best musicals about the idea of togetherness and loneliness. Um, you think it's not going to be very subtle about it because it's obviously about the single dude and his married friends. But throughout the course of the play, as you kind of relive the same night over and over again, the device of the show is really interesting and how much information you find out about the characters as the layers are peeled back. Company is kind of like Shrek in that way, in that he's someone with layers, like an onion or a parfait, and Company is a lot like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay. Speaking of Stephen Sondheim, I want to move into the 80s. And
Yes.
Stephen Sondheim's arguably most well-known show. Which show do you think this is? This is Stephen Sondheim's arguably most well-known show.
Sweeney Todd.
It is Sweeney Todd. Good job. Sweeney Todd is one of the most interesting shows. Did you get a chance to see? Because I've seen both the stage version and the film version. Have you
Mhm.
got a chance to see both?
So I've never seen like in person a stage production. But when I was in high school, I was in a class called Opera Plus because
Ooh,
I
Opera Plus. It's like Disney Plus, but for opera fans.
yeah. So basically, all we had to do during that entire class is watch operas and musicals, and I only had to write 2 papers the whole time, and they were like only like 5 paragraph papers at most. It was a weird class. All I had to do was watch things. So we watched a uh one of the productions of Sweeney Todd with Angela Lansbury as Mrs. Lovett.
She was a great Mrs. Lovett too.
Yeah.
One of her leading roles that she ever got on Broadway. Because she had been in the disastrous first run of Stephen Sondheim's show, Anyone Can Whistle, that nobody liked, and then she got to be Mrs. Lovett, which everybody liked.
Yeah.
So everybody liked that.
Because there's a lot of stage productions where like you get where they also get filmed, kind of like with Hamilton or Cats, and this was one of those. So
Yeah, the Angela Lansbury one, actually, it's the one where you definitely most see the idea of Sweeney Todd, not the Johnny Depp version, is the idea of it as kind of this like factory set where things move and you see all the pieces, you see kind of the behind the scenes of the tech moves, and you see about it as the idea of people versus machine, and like the soullessness of it is a big part of the show. So I think we've probably saw the same filmed production, which
yeah,
is really profound.
yeah. So I count it as like I've technically seen a stage production, just not in person.
Okay,
Um,
so you're
like
gonna be able to finish these lyrics. I can almost guarantee you, but I'm gonna do the lyrics, and you have to try to finish them as best you can. You don't have
okay.
to do the whole song, but just see if you can do the next line. So this line is, "Haven't you got poet?" or something like that.
I know what song it is. I can't think of the next line.
The next line is, "No, you see, the trouble with poet is how do you know it's deceased? Stick to priest." And this is from. Do you know what the title of the song is? You can give away the title of the song if you know.
So it's been a long time since I've actually like sat down and listened to Sweeney Todd. So like while I can't remember the name of the song, I know what the song is. And it's the one it's when they're singing about, if they were to kill the people, they would make them into the meat pies and then like all the flavors that would come from different types of people
Yeah.
because
Uh,
of what they do.
yeah. So for anyone looking for inspiration for how to create dialogue for kind of either nonsensical characters or for characters that speak in rhythm, Sweeney Todd's "A Little Priest" is a great song because it's this really wonderful back and forth where it's kind of like tempting Sweeney Todd into the thing that Mrs. Lovett's already wanting to do. Um, it's just back and forth. It's very playful. It's a very funny show too.
It's also one that when you're listening to it, you can also really hear more of Sondheim's use of like dissonance and diminished and augmented chords, especially when it comes to his use of God, I don't remember the one what the character is, but there's one character in that specifically his voice part is a countertenor, which is a tenor. So for anyone that doesn't know that one, it's a tenor that sings in the treble clef. And
Tenor
he,
sings really high. Countertenor is generally a very high tenor. It's like a baritone would sing very low, closer to a bass, and so a countertenor is going to sing very high.
a countertenor and I have roughly the same range, which is pretty wild. Um,
I used to
because
be countertenor back in my younger days. Now I can't do it anymore.
yeah, a countertenor adults are not as common as with children because then the voice drops
Yeah,
and everything changes and your chords thicken. But that one specifically, there is a countertenor part in it, and the countertenor is the one that's going up into the stratosphere in
yeah.
that part, which is very impressive and very high.
What I love about Sweeney Todd is it is almost like the Bizarro World version of A Christmas Carol. Like it has almost the same exact feel, same exact Victorian era city, but everyone in it is like their mirror version. So Scrooge is actually evil and unredeemable. And Mrs. Cratchit is completely insane in it. It's just like the funhouse evil version of A Christmas Carol. It's so good.
Yeah.
It's also proof that if you want to do something that has a really dark message, you don't have to be afraid. And this is for any creatives out there listening. You don't have to be afraid to add in humor into the darkness because it's actually a very funny show. And I think Stephen Sondheim was aware of that, which is why he put the humor in it because it has its own kind of dissonance. So like you hear the humor and you're like, should I be laughing? And then you laugh in spite of yourself, and then you feel bad for laughing. It's a really interesting show. It's easy to see why it's the one people think of most for Stephen Sondheim.
The other option I would have picked for like one of his more popular shows would have been Into the Woods.
Yes, I love Into the Woods.
I know that one.
Into the Woods.
And then there's also like a little night music, and there's so many.
Yeah. So Sondheim had a lot of contemporaries during this time, really, and one of them, of course, was Andrew Lloyd Webber. Um, so let's talk a little bit about Andrew Lloyd Webber. We've got Andrew Lloyd Webber's two big musicals really happened during the '80s, of course, which is Cats, which almost everyone has now seen, either the nightmare fuel of the CGI 2019-2018 movie, which is not great, and the kind of, or the filmed stage. So in the revival they did, where they show it as the actual, it's called a review. The technical term for it is a review, where it's not really about the plot, but there is plot. So Cats is a review musical. And so that means that really you're going to see a lot of dancing technique and a lot of singing. If you go to see like the Rockettes, you're seeing a review essentially. I would argue that Jersey Boys is more of a review than it necessarily is a jukebox musical. Smokey Joe's Cafe would also fit into that. Um, so yeah, so Cats. So here's my Cats question. This is going to be a softball for you because you love Cats. Who is the leader of the Cats who gets into the competition to get to the Heavenside layer?
Leader of the Cats.
Yeah, the cat that is the oldest cat. The cat that is the oldest biblical cat.
It's Old Deuteronomy. I also have the book that Cats is based off of.
Yes, it is based on a book of poetry, actually.
By T.S. Eliot. It's Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. And fun fact, when you find it, if you know cats, you can just sing the poems. Because it's the same, it's the lyrics are the poems.
Yes, it's not, it's one of those things where when you think about the term adaptation, Cats doesn't get used as much as it should be, but Cats is really just an adaptation of these poems. It's Andrew Lloyd Webber wanting to make a musical about cats.
Yeah. With the exception of Memory. Memory is not one of the poems. It is an actual song.
Well, it's the song that he kept trying to throw into a show and he couldn't figure out anywhere to put it, so it ended up in Cats. Yes.
It works for Cats.
It works for Cats, but it's very apparent he'd been trying to fit it in places for a long time. I'm glad he did it. I don't begrudge him success. I'm not Mr. Sheffield from The Nanny by any stretch, but like, it's fine. It's a great show-stopping piece. I don't think Cats would have been as popular without Memory. I feel like without Memory, Cats is just a review show that is just a whole bunch of cats, really. Which is weird to say, but that's what it is. It's people dressed as cats and they're on stage the whole time. It's one of the few shows where everybody is on stage the whole show, essentially.
It's it's great if you love cats. That's what it's great for.
I mean, that is the audience for Cats, are people who like cats or want to be a cat.
If you are
also super gay people. It's a very gay show. Like, it's very queer coded. I don't think any of the characters are out gay, but like, there's lots of queer coding for characters in gender specific relationships, shall we say.
Yeah.
And from Cats, we're going to head into the 90s. And the 90s is when Disney starts taking over. Actually, what's interesting is that Disney poached the people that made Little Shop of Horrors. And then after Disney movies started to become popular, like Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, then they started taking over Broadway with the shows from the cartoons they made, which is fun. So this is an easy one. Finish the lyrics from Beauty and the Beast. If you can you do a Beauty and the Beast? Finish the lyrics if I give them to you.
Yeah.
All right. So if I say little town, it's a quiet village, what's the next line?
Every day like the one before.
It's true. The ultimate slam poet I hate this town song. It is the opening to Beauty and the Beast. I do like Beauty and the Beast, both the animated musical and the stage musical, because like even though the stage musical adds in songs I don't think they necessarily need. Um, it's a great show for if you want to learn how to do transformation. Much like Cinderella, the transformation of the Beast happens pretty much on stage. Um, and the animated movie was written like a musical because that was everything that uh, Menken and Ashman knew was really Broadway. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so it's really written as a Broadway show, just animated. And it's the only animated film ever to get a 10-minute standing ovation at like the New York Film Festival, uh, which is a hard crowd to get a standing ovation of any kind from, and it got like a 10-minute one. So
Wow.
yeah, people love that movie, and for good reason. It's a great movie. Okay, so here's a follow up. So Tim Rice, who was brought on to do the music for Aladdin after Howard Ashman passed,
Mm-hmm.
worked with the members of ABBA on a musical that came into vogue in the 90s. It's actually one of Josh Groban's favorite musicals. ABBA and Tim Rice, what musical did they write together?
Is that Mamma Mia?
It is not Mamma Mia. Surprising, I know.
Was it all the members of ABBA or
It was
just
not all the members of ABBA,
okay?
just the dudes. It was a big sausage fest, which explains the musical.
I feel like I know, and I feel like I don't know. Can I get another hint?
The other hint is that if you like Elaine Page and Barbara Dixon, you're going to love this musical. It's really hard to give a hint. There's like no hint to give because then
I,
you just know what it is.
I'm blanking.
So the male members of ABBA and Tim Rice got together, and the musical they created out of this was Chess. So
I
Chess,
don't
the
know one.
musical, which people, especially in London and the West End, people in Europe love chess. It never really hit like in America, but chess is a really great. It's about a chess competition. It was a musical made. You can make a musical about anything if you can make a musical about a chess competition. But it's really well done. It's a very emotional show. Like the show is all emotion, which is interesting when you see like music videos for it because it was so well loved in the West End. They like made music videos for it, and it's Chess, brought to you by ABBA and Tim Rice.
That's yeah. You know what? I've never heard of that one, and now I have a thing to look into.
I think it's great. It's a product of its time, so there's some times you're like, "Ooh, that's misogynistic," but there's a lot of musicals that have that issue, so it's not alone in that. But no, Chess, they love it in the West End. It just never seems to catch here in America. Josh Groban and Idina Menzel both really love it, which is why they've done songs from it. So I'm
That
a little
makes
surprised it hasn't happened more over here in America.
I only know of two plays. One of them's a musical. One is Into the Woods, and the other one is that it's got Angelica Houston in it.
Does it actually have Angelica Houston in it?
It actually has Angelica Houston in it.
I don't know if I believe you, Max. You lied to me once before about Angelica Houston, and it was a horrible mistake.
I can believe that Angelica Houston has done musical theater. I don't know that I believe that she was in Chess, and I know she wasn't in The Addams Family, which would be like in the 2010s. The Addams Family was not a musical show
No,
in
no,
the
this was definitely a theater production. I remember seeing it, and it wasn't a musical. It was just people talking. But yeah, Love Letters.
Oh, Love Letters. Oh
Oh.
yeah, that's a tough show. That is not a musical. Love Letters did influence the musical falsettos, which I'm not going to be talking about today because we just don't have the kind of time. Actually, we have been here for an hour now, and we're only in the 90s, but that's kind of interesting. I do have more questions about 90s musicals, like which 90s musical is set around Christmas time?
Rent.
It is Rent. Yes, that's one of the easier questions from that category. But Rent, especially the stage show, it's very prevalent in the stage show that it is set around Christmas. Jonathan Larson really, really went hard on the Christmas themes. There's some carols that are kind of like
Mhm.
made into really cool Christmas songs that homeless people play transitioning between scenes. You've never
Mm.
seen the stage version of Rent. It's very different from the movie musical that we got. And I don't think for the better.
That's fair. I haven't unfortunately gotten to see the stage production yet. Um, but even just listening to like the movie soundtrack and then the stage soundtrack is a very different feel.
Oh yeah, the stage show doesn't open with the Rent song like the movie does.
It doesn't open with 500 whatever the fuck minutes.
Yeah, it doesn't open 525,600 minutes. It actually has this really cool opening motif that it continues throughout the show of
Mhm.
these voicemail messages that Mark and Roger get. And for those of you of a certain age, an answering machine is something that was a precursor to voicemail. And so they get answering machine messages on their answering machine, which, if they had cell phones, would have been voicemail messages. But they're from their parents and other people in the play. But yeah, the Rent is one of the things where if you were looking at how adaptation works for someone called an auteur, which is a term I've used before. So like Les Mis is kind of an auteur thing. Cats have been auteur. I would argue Rent
Mhm.
by Christopher Columbus was an auteur thing because that was how Christopher Columbus saw it and made that his own. And so that's a version of like adapting something. So
Mhm.
and auteurs have really distinct styles. So like when you're watching a Steven Spielberg movie, so like you kind of know when you're seeing something by Lin Manuel Miranda
Mhm.
by kind of the rhythm of things and the kind of characters represented. Uh, like if you're watching It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, um, the Nightman Cometh, their kind of in-universe stage musical, which Lin Manuel Miranda actually loved. Um, is it's a very auteur thing because it's very them. It's both the actors and kind of the creative team from the show kind of living in the same world. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Do we want to wrap this up?
I'm going to wrap it up. I would
Awesome.
like to kind of begin wrapping up. Rihanna, so we kind of got up to 2000s. Now, 2000s to 2010s, there's been kind of a lot of talk about Broadway not changing and kind of sticking to that 90s philosophy of big budget musicals. Um,
Mhm.
but are there like some smaller musicals or less known musicals you'd like people to kind of discover that you'd like to recommend?
You know what? I have one. I
What
personally
would you like to recommend to the audience?
You know what? A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder.
Fabulous. Why would you like to recommend A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder other than the murder part? My D&D character is like, murder? Do tell.
It's so good. Um, you have Okay, so I'm not gonna like give away the plot because I think that's something that people should watch for themselves. Um, it's one of those musicals where you know what? It's in the category of it won a bunch of awards, but it wasn't gonna get like an actual national tour. It got like small tours of like they weren't going to be in big theaters, you know. Um but it's so funny and it's so good. And then you have one person on stage that's playing like 8 different characters. So they just keep coming back, but each one of their characters is supposed to die, and there's a song for each one.
I mean, that is the way that I'd like to go. Multiple personalities, each singing a different song.
But
Um,
they're like 8 different people, but all of the people are played by one actor. Um and it but it's honestly it's so good. Um you have gems of songs in it like Better with a Man. That one's that one's a good one. Um,
I think the ones that I would recommend, just because we're kind of running short on time here. Um, so my big one I'd like to recommend more people see is Sister Act. If Sister Act comes to your town, I think it's different enough from the film that it's based on. And the soundtrack is just divine, no pun intended, even though it's about nuns. I think it's a very pretty show too, which is not something I always recommend. As far as unknown musicals, I think anyone that can find Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. It's a musical set in Madrid, and you really feel it in the show. And I think it's a great show. I'd also recommend Glenn Hansard and Marketa Erglova's fabulous pop ballad of love Once. I think Once is great. And probably I'd also recommend Come From Away. Come
mhm.
From Away is a wonderful musical. Hard to describe without giving away the plot, but if Come From Away comes to your town, go and see it. I think you'll be moved in all the best ways, and those are the ones that I would recommend personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely agree with Come From Away.
Yeah. Oh, you don't agree with Sister Actor ones? I see how it is. That's
I
fine.
like Once and Sister Act is good, but Come From Away is just so good.
Yeah, Come From Away is on a different level. But there are so many musicals. Anyone in a creative headspace should not shy away from looking at musicals because I think they offer something for how we communicate with ourselves and with each other. And I think even ones that I don't like as much, I still can learn something from. Um, and so always be kind of looking out for that next thing that's going to inspire you. Like one of my favorite musicals is not a great one, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
Oh,
I
I love
love it because
Right.
these dudes dance around with axes, talking about how they're lonely polecats before they kidnap women.
Great.
It's great.
Oh, I
Hard
love
music.
Seven Brothers and the barn raising.
Barn raising, not a great message. Don't peek too far into the curtains. You just have to not think about the message of the show, but the show itself is great. Just don't think about the message. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
but to be fair, it is based off of like a story. It it's based off of a weird thing.
I think if I get when I get into an FA program, I would love to do a queer version of it with an all male cast because I think that would be just amazing. But I think that's the final thought I'm going to leave you with is don't be afraid of musicals. They are your friend. Um, I want to thank you, Rihanna, for joining me today for our musical theater just chats.
Well, thank you for having me. It was fun.
Now I'm going to go. Um, I have to get back under the Paris Opera House. I have a chandelier to rig, and my soprano is going into rehearsals for something called Don Juan, I think is what I'm calling it. But she's going into rehearsals, so I have to get back to the underground Parisian sewers. Keep your hands at the level of your eyes, and we will see everyone next time for REM Chats.